right, he should be arriving in a moment here. He said he's just sat down in his office. He'll have it up soon. All right, so again, in case anyone didn't catch it, he'll be here shortly. I've got the stream up. Excuse me, sorry. Yeah, if we end up reaching the limit on Discord, we have Twitch as a backup, which I'll start once he's here. I should be here very shortly.
Right.
Hello.
Good. Hi. I've been waiting for a bit. Did I do something wrong?
Cannot hear you, Warren. Can you? Do you have your mic muted?
Oh, let's see. The mic should be unmuted now. Can you hear me now?
Uh-huh.
No, you can't. Let's see. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry about that. We're good to go. Can you hear me?
I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
I can. Okay, I'm sorry. That was an issue on my end. We're good to go.
Okay, that sounds great.
All right. So let's see here. So for everyone watching this, we've got Dr. Warren Farrell here. Dr. Warren Farrell is the author of The Boy Crisis. He was once called a leading male feminist and is now considered by many to be a leading men's movement activist. He has taken a lot of flack from modern feminists because he's been critical of many of them. So, Dr. Warren, you were an early pioneer of the women's rights movement back in, I believe, the 1970s, and now a pioneer of the men's rights movement. Could you say a bit about that? How do you reconcile, those two? They seem to usually be in conflict.
Yes, unfortunately, they usually are. But I've never been I've always been in favor of what I call gender liberation. I've always wanted to free, but I never wanted a women's movement being calling men the oppressors or being critical of men, or a men's movement being critical of women. I always wanted a gender liberation movement freeing both sexes from the rigid roles of the past for more flexible roles for their future. And so when the women's movement surfaced and began to say, I want women to be free to be able to be mothers if they wish to, but also top level executives if they wish to, or have whatever combination of a career and raising money, raising children that they wish to do. I always wanted women to be three, what I call three option women, raising money, raising children, or doing some combination of both, and doing that at different times of their life if they wished. And also for women to be, for women to be gender fluid if they wish. That is, we shouldn't be in the straitjacket of roles that were very helpful for the past, for reasons that most people don't ever recognize, but that I'll be happy to talk about, but are not helpful for the future. And that we're freer to be able to be flexible for the future. But what we as feminists did not realize, and I say we as feminists because I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City and spoke all around the world on behalf of the feminist movement, and I think many people felt I was the world's leading male feminist, and so I made my living certainly from speaking on these issues, and I always wanted women to get as far as they could, but I also always recognized that we did not live, as recent feminists have been saying, in a world dominated by a patriarchy in which men made the rules to benefit men at the expense of women. I always felt that we lived in a world dominated by the need to survive. And this is what I talk about in a book that I know that you read, The Myth of Male Power. And in that book, I talk about that patriarchy was not the dominating force. The need to survive was the dominating force. Our grandparents, if you talk with your grandparents, they'll never say to you, "Oh yes, we grew up talking about rights." They grew up talking about obligations and responsibilities, and that was true for both men and for women. Women were programmed to raise children, even though they might have been potentially gifted presidents of the United States or CEOs. Men were programmed to raise money, even if they might have been musicians that couldn't be good enough in business to make a real living from music, or artists, or they might have been wonderful dads, full-time dads and nurturers and protectors. It didn't make any difference whether your personality was more oriented toward being a loving, caring, nurturing male or not. If you were a loving, caring, nurturing male, you were insulted until you learned to either give up hope in yourself, or to give up a job that you love to do, like maybe teaching in elementary school, because once your wife had children, you knew that you didn't have an option. If you got married and you had children, if you were loved elementary school teaching, you had a passion for it or loved music, you learned to give up your music career unless you were John Lennon, and you learned to give up teaching if your wife had 2 or 3 or 4 children, because you wanted to be able to support those children better than an elementary school teacher could support them. So you went into something you may have hated, like being an administrator or a superintendent of schools. But the feminist movement turned that on its head. And instead of saying, thank you, men, for when you got married, to give up what you wanted to do what you needed to do to earn money so that we could have a better home and better school district and a better life. Thank you for giving up what you loved in order to earn something that makes more money. Thank you for giving up selling insurance locally to sell it nationally, even though you didn't like to be away from home and you experienced the father's catch-22 of learning to love the family by being away from the love of the family. Thank you for doing that and feeling obligated to earn money that maybe some of the rest of us were spending while you maybe died sooner. And so, and then you learned, but the feminists learned to call the male obligation to earn money that somebody else spent while they died sooner. They learned to call that power and privilege. But it's not male privilege to die in wars and to die in all the hazardous jobs. It is male obligation. But instead of being appreciated for that sacrifice and that obligation, we as feminists condemn them for that, as if that was part of male privilege. And that's where the feminist movement has gone wrong. And by having women say that they were oppressed by men who were making these sacrifices, rather than saying, thank you for those sacrifices, we have turned women from the early feminist movement, where we talked about, I am woman, I am strong, to the current feminist movement, where it's a competition for victim power, or I am woman, I've been wronged.
Okay, and I'm kind of curious here. You know, you still identify yourself as a feminist, correct?
I identify myself as a feminist, if feminism means gender liberation, and I identify myself as a men's issues person if men's issues people are not blaming women, but they are talking about gender liberation. I don't identify myself with either movement that is anti the other gender. I'm a very strong believer that we're all in the same family boat. When only one sex wins, both sexes loses. And when we bring up men today, young men today, to say the future is female, and then they look at their, that pictures of dads or advertisements of dads on TV, and they see bungling dads, and they see boys falling behind girls in almost every academic subject, but the fact that they are is not being paid attention to. When they notice that 4 out of 5 suicides when boys are in their 20s are from males, when they see men's sperm count dropping by 50%, when they see male IQs dropping, all of these are hard data that I document in the Boy Crisis book. When they see that boys are doing worse in more than 50 areas of development: depression, addiction to drugs, overdosing of opioids, addiction to video games, addiction to porn, just one form of problem, developmental problem after the other, and no one is paying attention to these boys. This is why Fed Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, in analyzing the future of the American economy, said that there are 2 major potential crises in the future which we're not facing. One is the crisis of cyber warfare, and the other is the crisis of what is happening to our boys, that are leading to our boys not being able to be as economically productive as they need to be. And we have to realize that when boys are not economically productive, this is not good for girls or women. I don't know any girl, or today, 66% of the young men between 25 and 31 who live at home, 66% of the people who live at home between those ages are young men. And I don't know any women who are interested in having children, who are going around looking for young men in unemployment lines, living in their family's basement with a failure to launch mentality for their future, for the future fathers of their children. So when men lose, women lose. The great majority of women still are heterosexual, and when they're left to be feeling that they can't find a partner who's worthy of their love, then I fear for the women as well as for men. And I have two daughters, and my co-author John Gray on the Boy Crisis book, he's got three daughters, and so between the two of us, we are very invested in the future of our daughters, and I don't want our daughters to have boys and men that are not worthy, as I said, not worthy of their love.
And you mentioned that, you're, if I understood this correctly, that you're happy to identify as a feminist or a part of the men's rights movement, or the men's movement rather, so long as it's, not about hate and it is about gender liberation. Is that correct?
Yes, I don't really
Okay.
like the word rights in either for either women or for men. I understand that rights is a lot more acceptable for the right to vote and stuff like that. And it was very important, and there is some rights for men. For example, the right to be able to have children equally after divorce, the right to be able to not have to be the ones registering for the draft. Many people don't even recognize today that if you have an 18-year-old boy, he is responsible for registering for the male-only draft registration, and if he doesn't do that, he has a $250,000 fine. He's subject to a multiple-year jail term. He can't get into any school that gets federal aid, which is pretty much every school, and has and can never work for the post office or any government agency. There are many, but this is clearly a violation of the 14th Amendment's equal protection rule,
Mhm.
but nobody even talks about it and mentions it, nor do they talk about the mention of the fact that if males don't produce as much money as women do, the males are still not usually considered very eligible for future marriage. And so there's this enormous condemnation of men who earn more money, and ignoring of men as eligible if they earn less money than women do.
Okay. So I want to move on to questions that our users have, but before we do, you mentioned being in favor of gender liberation. I think a lot of people would be unsure of what that means, and I've heard it myself so much through college, and I'm still a little bit unclear. What do you mean when you say gender liberation?
Absolutely. Gender liberation is being free from the rigid roles of the past, and being taught to pursue much more flexible roles for the future. So one of the good things about the women's movement is that when I grew up, women did not, they weren't expected to play sports. If there were, the brilliant women in my class were often told, well, you could be a great teacher, you could be, a wonderful support system for a man, you could be a great secretary, you could be, maybe a minor level executive, but there was, or be involved as a science researcher. But the thought of her maybe winning a Nobel Prize or that type of thing was just not part of what guidance counselors told young girls and women when I grew up in the 50s. And I'm so, one of the reasons I fought so hard for the women's movement at the very beginning, when the women's movement was condemned as being a bunch of dykes and bra burners and, ugly women and men haters. Those were the terms that were thrown around in the late 60s, early 70s about women who were feminist in their orientation. These were all my friends. And they were my Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, people that I really cared about and fought for the cause of freeing women to have opportunities that they never had before. But in the old days, women were restricted in those ways. And I'm so glad we recognized that. But what we didn't recognize that is that our fathers were also restricted. So we began to say things as feminists, such as men earn more money than women do for the same work. That was true to some degree back in the 70s. However, even back in the 70s, never married women who never had children out-earned never married men who never had children even in the 70s. Now they out earn their male counterparts by 17%. I document all this really carefully with U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics in a book that I researched called Why Men Earn More and What Women Can Do About It, and looking at the startling truth behind the pay gap. And so the really big, if you want to understand in one sentence the pay gap, it is not about men versus women. It is about dads versus moms. Dads learn as soon as they become dads that they no longer have the expectation, the privilege of being able to earn a small amount of money. Whatever they do, like my father told me when I looked like I was, some people thought I was a gifted writer. And so, my father said, Warren, you cannot write books for a living. And I said, why not? And my dad said, because you will, only 1 out of 100 people who write books get publishers, and if you don't get a publisher, you'll never get a wife, you'll never have a family, and you'll never be. Your job as a man is not to do what you want to do. Your job as a man is to fulfill obligations that help your children have better lives than you will have. That's the job of men, and just like it's the job of women. And so what I learned was that I couldn't be a writer so I fought being a little bit of a rebel, I fought very hard to write and to get good contracts that proved to my father, myself, and any woman that might be interested in me that I had not only a gift, but that I had a gift that could translate into a decent amount of advance, and therefore be able to help support a family with that supposed gift. And so what we missed as feminists is that the men earning more money was part of male obligation, was part of male sacrifice, that the more fulfilling a job is, the more likely it is to pay less money. That's why we're called starving artists. That's why musicians usually have a gig here and there, but very few musicians make money. If you're an actor and you live in Los Angeles, you have the same name as all the other actors, and that name is called waiter. And and only 1/10 of 1% will make it. And so but we as feminists did not recognize that men do earn more, and at that time in the 70s, it often was for the same work, less and less so now, and it's terrible whenever it is. But overall, what I did is to measure it. When I did the research for Why Men Earn More, I researched all the factors that led to men and women either earning more money or having better lives. And I found out there were 25 major variables that led to men in every single case earning more money than women, like, for example, being willing to take the hazardous job, being willing to be a garbage collector if they had a small amount of education, being willing to go into the military and potentially die. And so those jobs, so men were more likely to do those things, but they were less likely to do, once they had children, the more fulfilling jobs that tended, as a rule, to pay less because, and if you want a sense of why the fulfilling jobs pay less, is because the more fulfilling a job is, the more people want to do it. Everybody wants to be a writer. Everybody wants to help other people. Everybody loves to teach and be paid attention to or mentor. So there's lots of competition for those jobs. The supply is great in relation to the demand. That's why those fulfilling jobs pay less.
All right. So we'll just jump into user questions here. Fawn asks, do you think non-conventional families, such as ones where the father takes equal or more of a caretaker role, or families with single mothers, are what negatively influence boys, or is it mainly exposure to modern feminism that negatively affects them?
Well, it's what is very, very clear, and I researched this extensively for the Boy Crisis book, and a book before that called Father and Child Reunion. Just to give a bit of background on that, I'm a stepdad to 2 daughters, and I was hoping when I started researching the Boy Crisis book and Father and Child Reunion that stepdads would be found to be as effective for children as biological dads. I couldn't find any evidence to back up my desire. And researchers oftentimes find evidence to prove what they want to at the beginning. Well, I also, the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City very much wanted me to find that you could be a single mom and children would turn out just as good as if you were had an equal amount of fathering and mothering. Just turned out to not be true. So here's what was true. In all 56 developed nations around the world, um, that's in all 56 of those developed nations, boys are falling behind girls in every single academic subject, in almost all areas of psychological help like depression, suicide, and so on. They're almost all areas of physical health, like I mentioned before about the sperm count dropping 50%. Almost all areas of intellectual health, like IQs dropping. Almost all areas of emotional skill sets, like being able to be assertive versus aggressive, being able to be empathetic, and all areas of economic achievement, being able to, for example, finish high school. And if you don't finish high school, your unemployment rate is over 20% when you're in your 20s. And so in all of these areas, boys are falling behind girls. So it's more than 50 areas of development. So I started looking at that as, why is this in all of the developed nations? I found that in the developed nations, there was not so much focus on survival. There was the ability of the society to be able to say, women, if you want, and men, if you want divorces, you can get divorces. Women, if you want to raise children without having a man that you're married to, marriage is not so significant. You don't have to worry about getting married. You can have social permission. You won't be ostracized if you raise a child by yourself without getting married. So as I looked at the different demographics, I found that it was that when men and women divorce and they have children that are minimally exposed to dads, that is, they're dad-deprived children, it was that group of children of divorce that did particularly badly. And then I looked over at the women who were raising children without being married. I have no big issue with marriage. I'm politically liberal in my orientation. And so marriage, no marriage, I thought was 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. That's a choice. Well, it is a choice. But I also found that when women have children without being married, some small percentage of those women live with a man when they are when they first have the children, but those men and the women only last an average of 3 years, and then usually the children have a minimal or no father involvement after that, or they never knew their father to begin with, or they're uncertain as to who their father was, or their father was involved minimally in their life all along. And it's in those group of children that might be called for simplicity purposes, dad-deprived children. Those dad-deprived children do much worse in more than 50 developmental areas than children that have what I call checks and balance parenting, which is an equal amount of parenting from both father and mother, particularly after divorce. And particularly if your child is a boy child. When a girl grows up with a female role model, so a single mom, let's say, at least the girl has two things. She has a female of this, if she has a parent of the same gender as she is. So she has some sense of what it's like and to be inspired to be an adult female. She also has social permission to express feelings, express fears, to cry, and that allows the mother and parents and people in general, psychologists, guidance counselors, to be able to see that she's in grief and reach out and help her. Boys have neither. They have no male role model or very minimal male role model, or the male role model that they have, they often hear bad things about, so they fear that they're going to become those bad things, irresponsible, a liar, and so they begin to feel badly about themselves. And secondly, if they feel badly about themselves, they don't have nearly as much social permission to share what's bothering them, and that becomes, so they start to internalize and keep their feelings and fears to themselves, often leading to depression, to drinking, to acting out, and they become boys who hurt. And boys who hurt us. Boys who hurt are the boys who commit suicide more. They are the mass murderers, the mass shooters. They're the school shooters. They are the ISIS recruits, and they are the great majority of male prisoners. And as you know, that 93% of the prisoners are males.
All right. So there's been a few questions here on this general topic. Scavenger Burke and a few others want to know, what is your opinion on toxic masculinity?
The liberals say no such thing as toxic masculinity. I mean, that masculinity is quite toxic. The conservatives say masculinity is to be magnified and not, criticized. And both and neither are true. So I'll explain. Throughout all of history, every generation had its war in almost every society. And in every society, boys were seen as potential heroes, both by their father, their mother, their siblings, their peers, if they were people who were willing to die, risk their lives in that war, so to make sure that we never had to live under Nazi rule, for example. And so the boys that were willing to do that at the age of 17, 18, and so on, especially the ones that died in that war, were looked upon as heroes. And so boys received what might be called social bribes to be willing to die and be disposable. Now, if you're in boot camp, and anyone that's been in boot camp will understand this immediately, and let's say you're Jewish, and let's say you had a sergeant who was anti-Semitic, and he started throwing names. He sort of started saying literally the most terrible things possible, like Hitler's right, all the Jews should be killed, type of thing. And you were Jewish, and you started saying, wait a minute, I find that to be anti-Semitic. It's horrible. I can't possibly work with you this way. The response in boot camp would be, aha, got you. You're expressing your feelings. Do 50 push-ups, and and the rest of the people at boot camp would be encouraged to ostracize you. If you're Catholic, if you were short, if you were short, you'd be mocked because you were short. If you were Catholic, you might be mocked for some different reason. No matter who you were, it was the job of the sergeant in boot camp to find your weakness and to exploit your weakness. And so your job as a male was to cover up your feelings, to never show in any way that you were bothered by anything that was said. Why? Because your job was to be a cog in the war machine. You were not to be a human being with feelings and sensitivities. You were to be a human doing who was cut off from being a human being. And only as a human doing were you able to survive all the pressures on you to give up any sensitivities that you had. And and if you did that, you would be much more willing to die in war. It wasn't functional for being willing to die, to be in touch with your feelings and your fears. You would not be as willing to go out there and take the risks of life. And so so males, who are disconnected from their feelings and disconnected from their fears and unable to even get in touch with them because they know that there will be no positive use of it. The sergeant won't like them, that no woman wants to marry a private and a pacifist. She wants to marry an officer and a gentleman. Heroes have always been people that have been willing to risk their lives and lose their lives. And so this disconnection from self, this disconnection from feeling, those are toxicities. That's what conservatives need to understand. What liberals need to understand is that those toxicities did emanate not from male privilege, but from male sacrifice. And to call men who are disconnected from who they are as people who are privileged is to miss the total understanding of masculinity. That, when I wrote The Myth of Male Power, the subtitle of it was Why Men Are the Disposable Sex. Until you understand that men were trained for disposability, not for privilege, that men were trained to earn more money, yes, and to be the presidents of corporations and leaders, not because because we needed people to make this tough decisions. We needed people to invent things. We needed people to lead, and men who did it well, they would get rewards. But your obligation as a man was to have no option but to do something that led to the earning of money for other people, including and especially including your family. And ideally, the more people you earn money for, the more money you would make, and the more women would be interested in you, and the more you would get accepted rather than rejected. So until a person understands the social bribes that led to male masculinity being toxic, one understands literally nothing about masculinity.
All right. So our user Atlas writes that he would like to ask Dr. Farrell, I'm just reading his words here, that I appreciate his time and coming to this discussion to speak with us. My question is, do you feel that the feminist movement is pushing men and boys closer to this kind of suicidal brink, like you had talked about in your TED Talk? And as a follow-up question, what is your stance on the so-called Meninist movement?
Yes, I don't know if maybe he can, is it a he that is writing this?
I believe so.
Right. Maybe he could define Meninist movement better. Is this like the men's issues movement or the men's movement? And if so, I'll respond to it with the assumption that that is the case. And let's see, the first part of that question again was what?
So the first part of the question was, do you feel that the feminist movement is pushing men and boys closer to this kind of suicidal brink, like you had talked about in your TED Talk?
Oh God, it is so hard to have been so connected with a movement that I'd have to say that, certainly it is not the purpose of feminists to encourage suicide among males. I think most feminists care about men, and maybe some of the very strong feminists have many very minimal amount of caring about men. But the outcome, whenever is yes to, and here's the reason why the answer unfortunately is yes. Number one. We have had a culture of the shaming of men. Hashtag Me Too is very positive and important, but hashtag Me Too has become a hashtag Me Too monologue. It has to be, if it's to be female positive and male positive in the long run, it has to be a hashtag Me Too dialogue. Feminists are so oblivious to even understanding that males have their own experience of powerlessness, that it doesn't even occur to the great majority of feminists that men have a series of perspectives that are different but equally as valuable, and that if we are ever to make progress between the sexes, if we're ever to understand that we're all in the same family boat, and when only one sex wins, both sexes lose, that there has to be a dialogue. We have to, it's this, and if there's anyone that needs to have permission to speak more at this point in history, it is males, because males have been by definition programmed to repress their feelings. Every male knows who is successful. He knows it without knowing it, because he doesn't even know enough to admit it to himself, that in order to become successful, your job is to repress your feelings, not express your feelings. So if you are to be the typical male, the male that is admired in society, you need to repress your feelings, and then of course you will be condemned for repressing your feelings. That's the catch-22 that men face today. And when you're taught to repress your feelings in order to be a man, then you need to at least first get in touch with your feelings, and then secondly, talk about those feelings. And third, learn to talk about those feelings in non-female hating ways, but in ways that allow females to also speak and to be part of an overall dialogue. That is the future of what's needed. The shaming of men is so deep that we not only do we hear constantly the future is female, but you can imagine if you have a son who's 10, 11, 12 years of age, and he's hearing that the future is female, and he's seeing all the male images of dads on TV as being bumbling idiots or jerks of some sort or another, that this does not create the future is female, and if you want to be a wonderful dad, the only option you have is to be a jerk, or you're seen as a loser because you tell a young woman at a party that who seems like she might be interested in you, and you're certainly interested in her, and she says, well, what do you do? What are you going to school for? And you say, well, I'm going to school in music, but I really want to be a full-time dad. And she goes and tells a reporter at the party, but doesn't come back for a second drink. And after a while, you get the hint that being a full-time dad is not an option for you if you want to be attractive to women. These are the types of things that make men feel ashamed of themselves. And when they feel ashamed of themselves, shame is not a positive feeling that that motivates one to succeed and achieve. And so when boys, in addition to that, do not have dads, so feminists have encouraged women to have the freedom to be able to raise children by themselves. They encourage mothers and fathers after divorce, that women have the best interests of the children at heart, and if they want to raise the children full-time, they should be able to raise the children full-time. Well, that's a setup for suicide in this type of way. Children that are raised with minimal or no fathers, dad-deprived children, that's the single biggest predictor of suicide. Now, why? It's the single biggest predictor of suicide because father involvement, mother and father involvement both have very important contributions. Moms, as a rule, tend to protect children, think very, when the child is suffering or hurt or in pain, feel a great deal of feelings to make sure that child ends his or her suffering. They have what we all call unconditional love. What dads have is also unconditional love, but dads have less conditional approval. They're okay if the child falls down on the ski slope and to encourage that child to try on that ski slope again. They're okay to roughhouse with the child, and maybe the child puts an elbow in his sister's face and saying, okay, that's going to be the end of the roughhousing. Your sister cried. You can no longer have any more roughhousing if you continue doing that. And then everybody starts crying because they end the roughhousing, and mom is saying, how can you as a dad roughhouse? You just seem like I have just one more child to monitor. But what no one understands is that the dad who is doing the roughhousing is teaching that child to distinguish between being assertive and aggressive. And what happens when a child can distinguish between being assertive and aggressive and learns empathy by thinking of his sister's feelings? That child has more friends. That child is more likely to have postponed gratification. Instead of roughhousing and pushing his child aside, the sister aside, that child learns to postpone the gratification of winning in the roughhousing by just pushing his sister aside and learning rules that are fair, that are assertive but not aggressive, in order to exceed at the roughhousing. That child who has postponed gratification, as a rule, girl and boy, does much better in school. The child who does much better in school gets much better feedback from parents, from teachers, and in male-female circles, gets much better feedback from females if he's a boy. And so the child that doesn't do that starts feeling ashamed of him or herself, feels that they can't succeed very effectively, they're the ones more likely to withdraw into video games, drinking, drugs. And with boy-girl area, if the heterosexuals among them, the boys are far more likely to withdraw into pornography, because pornography is access to a variety of attractive women without fear of rejection at a price he can afford. But as a boy gets into pornography, he tends to get more and more addicted to the dopamine that comes from greater and greater risks in pornography. And that boy who gets into that area, then when a real life woman gets attracted to his life, he finds that the woman feels treated like an object in a porn movie because she is being treated like an object in a porn movie. And the boy then feels rejected, as he should if he's treating a woman that way. And so that increases his depression. And that depression in worst case scenarios can lead to suicide. in super worst case scenarios, boys like that who are hurt, boys who are hurt us. They are, as I mentioned before, they are the ones who are doing the joining ISIS. About 90% of your ISIS recruits are males. Almost all of those are dad-deprived males. They are the ones that are doing the school shootings. In the 21st century, 100% of the school shooters who have shot more than 10 people, killed more than 10 people, 100% of them are fatherless males. And then third, among the prisoners, 93% of the prisoners are males, as I mentioned before, but about 85 to 90% of those prisoners who are males are dad-deprived males. And so, your crimes, when boys are hurt, they not only hurt themselves, as in commit suicide, in direct answer to the question that was asked, they also hurt us. And that costs us emotionally, and it also costs us financially well over $1 trillion per year.
So just for clarity on that, what is a dad-deprived male? Is that someone in a single parent home without a father?
It's any child who has minimal or no father involvement. And so it could be a child of divorce, where the mother has the child, let's say, all the time except every other weekend and maybe a night in between. That would be almost invariably a dad-deprived male. Those are usually among the worst of the situation. Or among children who are born to moms who have the dad in their life for a few years, but then the dad and the mom get upset with each other, they get separated, and the child, from the child's perspective, feels abandoned by the father, and in the boy's case, doesn't have a male role model, or the mother never knew the father to begin with, or the mother knew the father but never had a relationship with the father to begin with. All of those are dad-deprived boys and girls. But as I was saying before, the damage is to both sexes, different types of damage to boys and girls, although most of the damage is the same, but much more intense for the boys. Boys are far more likely to commit suicide, for example, die of a drug overdose, do dysfunctional behavior like commit crimes, etc. Than the girls are. Your mass shooters are not dad-deprived girls; they are dad-deprived boys.
Okay. Okay, so our next question is from Adra Rising. They ask, do you believe that men should, instead of seeking out money, that they should instead seek out a balanced life like women do?
Yes, I do believe that would be healthy masculinity, would be focusing. Now, it doesn't have to be a balanced life, but they should consider all the potential balances of life. So, I work really hard, and especially since I started disagreeing with some of the things feminists were saying, I've had to work a lot harder. But I do overall lead a balanced life, but it's a constant fight to do that, to keep my life balanced. And if I wasn't really educated in those areas, it would be very easy to slip into an out of balance life. So a balanced life is on average what leads the great majority of people to feel happiest. But it's also, but you don't want to put people in the straitjacket of a balanced life. Some people really get such a sense of purpose by producing that they're happiest that way. And if they're married to somebody who is happy having them do that, that is fine. So the first job of us as parents is to discover our children's personalities. In the old days, it was not the first job of parents to discover their children's personalities. It was the first job of parents to make sure that boys like me did not become writers and thinkers, because you don't, as a rule, make money to support families that way. So my father was not programmed to program me for a balanced life. He was programmed to program me for a life where I achieved a significant amount of money, where I could support a wife and children in a style to which they would like to become accustomed, and to be able to go to live in neighborhoods and go to schools to which they become accustomed. But in brief, though, the great majority of children want balanced lives, and people that are happiest, as a rule, have balanced lives. Since the women's movement, women have had much more permission to develop lives that are, as I mentioned before, They either lives that are focused on earning, raising money, raising children, or doing some combination of both, dependent upon their personalities. And what I would like mothers and fathers to do is first help discover their children's personality. And then, instead of just telling their child, you know, you have a wonderful singing voice, you should become a singer. But the child, you know, you're good with your body, you should become a gymnast. But the child who has a dream but doesn't have the discipline to fulfill that dream soon becomes disappointed in himself or herself. So one of the usual contributions of dads is to create that postponed gratification that allows the child to pursue a dream, let's say become that gymnast. Well, that gymnast will definitely not have a balanced life. In order to become that, you know, Olympic gymnast star, you're going to give up most things in life. But if you're happy doing that and you have a gift doing that, and you're not feeling that the only way you can get your parents' love, or, you know, if you're a guy, a woman's love, is by being out of balance, then I want you to be able to go for that. But you know, there's no formula for who the next person should be, because we're all unique selves, as Mark Gaffney says. And the and our job as parents is to help our child discover his or her unique self, and then have the discipline to be able to accomplish that, but not feel that their job is that they're only worthwhile as human beings if they become human doings.
Okay. So normally with these AMAs, I try to remove myself as if, like, I don't exist, and stick to the user's questions and the guests' answers. I'm gonna break that a little bit here. I tend to find that one of the biggest things, and like I'm curious, if you agree with this as well as what my follow-up question is, but I tend to find one of the biggest things that makes people happy, or at least contented, is a sense of belonging, a sense of being desired or needed or wanted. And you alluded earlier to men largely being desired or wanted based on their ability to materially provide. And I'm just kind of wondering, what is the correct balance there? Because if that is beyond from an individual person's control, that's what they're going to be valued on. They can't control that. And so if they're going to be valued based on largely their ability to materially provide, um, but they're trying to lead an otherwise balanced life, it would seem that on some level they're going to be less contented or less happy. Does that seem? Do you get the tension I'm trying to draw at here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And yes, our job as, you know, parents is to both help our child develop, you know, discover his or her gifts. Now, my gift happened to be in math, but my father was an accountant, and but I didn't enjoy math. And to to my father's great, disappointment, I went into, what I went into. And and as long as I was involved with the feminist movement, I made good money on doing that, speaking, and so there wasn't as great attention with my parents in relation to my doing what I want to do, because I had discovered a way of being able to make a living doing that. But when I started disagreeing with some of the feminists and went from 50 speaking engagements per year down to 0, um, I had to make a really tough decision. And that decision was, am I willing to sort of speak up about what I feel is right, and where I feel the feminist movement is both accurate, and therefore I lose the support of many conservatives, and also inaccurate, and therefore I lose the support of many liberals and feminists. But I need to speak up about that as long as I can reasonably, do reasonably well, enough that I'm not hurting my family in the process of doing that. And so it is this balancing act. But the first job, since we're as infants, as parents, is that my father didn't feel he had the freedom to allow me to be able to decide what I wanted to do, because that, from his perspective, was not the job of a man or the job of a woman in those days to do what they wanted to do. It was to do what they needed to do, which was to create more children, and for the women to do what would make them most accepted in the society, which was to raise those children and for me to raise the money. And so now there is a chance for women are raised with, with those options that I was mentioning before, but we live in the society of multi-option women and no-option men, where the man, once he's getting married and ready, decides to get married and have children, it's at that point in time where he often feels he loses his options. And so to dig into your question is that it's our job as parents to talk to our daughters about, that if you want a balanced, loving, nurturing man, to either raise the children full time, or to raise them part time, or to be at least involved with your children without just selecting a man for his future earning capability, that then you will have, my daughter, you will have more freedoms. That is, if you want to be a have-it-all woman and break glass ceilings, and you are a future, Hillary Clinton, Elizabeth Warren, or any female leader who wants to be the president or the prime minister of your country, then you don't need a man who is also a superstar financially. You need a man, and you, by have-it-all woman, you want to have children, and you want to have those children raised well, and you want to have a good marriage, and you want to be able to be successful in the world. Then, my sweetheart, dear daughter, look around you at the men who are, when you talk, they listen. When you talk, they are drawing you out. That find the men who have good emotional skills, who have good nurturing skills, who won't feel like they are nobody if they raise the children full time. And by the way that a man will feel like somebody is if you look at him like he's somebody, if you treat him like somebody. You have to deal with your own the confronting society's pressure on you to marry the man who earns as much or more than you, and feel proud of marrying that type of man and having children with that type of man. So all of us need to change. Every woman who's listening to this, or a man who's listening to this who cares about a woman, needs to know, and men will recognize the value of what I'm saying here. Every heterosexual man understands that if women tomorrow started saying, I'll adore men, have sex with men, and be married to men who are walking on their hands, that we'd be having hand walking contests starting tomorrow. Because men do, the old saying, happy wife, happy life. Almost every man knows that. It's not in the family. It is not men who have the power. Almost every man knows that it's the woman and the woman's approval that he cares about. But a man needs to not be the prisoner of that approval, nor the prisoner of his parents' approval, or the prisoner of his society's need to make him into a human doing rather than a human being. And so this is our next evolutionary shift. The qualities it took to raise children successfully in the past are different from the qualities it will take to raise children successfully in the future. And to raise children successfully in the future, the children that do the best are the ones that have checks and balance parenting, where both parents are helping their child discover their unique selves, and then to have the discipline to achieve it, rather than just to say, oh, I have a gift, if they want to achieve that. And if they are gifted in an area like I was in math, and that's not the area that sings to them, to have the freedom to be able to have their discipline apply to an area that does sing to them.
Okay.
Does that respond to your question?
Yeah, I think it does. So if I'm understanding this right, yeah, it's going to take changes large scale and not on that's not something that an individual can really wrestle with on their own. Is that right?
Well, an individual can wrestle with it on their own. I definitely was pretty much on my own in the wrestling of it. But it certainly is a lot easier if everyone's working on that together, and that So for example, I think I talk about dozens of ways that families can do this on the family level, and ways that schools can do this, and ways that the government can work with this. I'm working with the White House now to develop a father warrior program that if this virus gets over before Father's Day, there's a good chance that I've written up a first draft of a speech for President Trump that he may or may not deliver, depending on the situation, for Father's Day, that obviously in modified form, on the importance of developing fathers, and the importance of fathers, and the importance of making fathers valued in life, and because of all the problems for the society that happens when fathers are not involved. And so we all have to be part of this process, and in order to, but I think I missed something in the question you asked. Tell me, where did I skip my
Um,
response?
yeah, I'm just wondering, like, so as an individual, like, one person just trying to live their best life, how should one man, and I guess here we really are speaking about an individual man, how should he grapple with that? Because I see some kind of tension between, uh, you know, the want to be desired, which is largely based on the ability to materially provide,
Mhm.
and other senses of happiness. I do think that
Yeah.
there's certainly happiness that comes from being needed, and
Mhm.
also from, other areas. And it seems to me like the balanced life is, the other areas. But a lot of times, a man who lives a balanced life isn't as desirable in the
Yes.
dating market.
Yes, and so ideally, parents will help children. So in the when I did the research for the Boy Crisis book, I found that your question was so important that it really needed concrete answers. And so I began to talk about family dinner nights and how these discussions can happen. But as I observed people having family dinner nights, they often became dinner nightmares. And because, somebody didn't feel heard, they, opened up finally after being repressed, and then they got, lectured to. And so if you pay attention to any portion of the Boy Crisis book, pay attention to Appendix A on how to construct a family dinner night. So, for example, the first job of a family dinner night is to have them, first of all, in a disciplined way, like once or twice a week. Second, to make sure that that you rotate once the kids get old enough, that you rotate people being able to volunteer the topic they'd like to talk about. Third, that you rotate who's facilitating that family dinner night. Fourth, that you be able to have each person at the table be able to share exactly what he or she is feeling. And then third, or next, fifth or sixth, whatever, is that other people at the table are sharing what they heard, and continue to attempt to share what they heard until that person who was just speaking says, yes, that's exactly what I was trying to say. Now I feel heard. It's the job. And then after everybody at the table has had a chance to speak, and this may last a second time of the week, or you can put this off till the next week, then each person has a chance to share their perspectives as well. So every person at the table knows that when they speak, they're speaking about their feelings, their fears, their desires are not going to be cut off, that they're not going to be subject to a lecture, but that everybody else at the table will eventually have a chance to speak as well. And that includes, by the way, the parents. Family dinner night should not just be for the freedom of the children to open up and speak. It should also be teaching the children how to facilitate space and draw out their sisters and brothers and their mother and their father. And when family dinner nights are conducted in this type of way, then they are so satisfying to kids that there is not much of an argument anymore about bringing electronics to the table, because there's fulfillment there. I talk about in the Boy Crisis book that it's not just good to set it up in everything that I've been saying, but to allow for controversial topics. When you and I talked about questions that were able to be asked of me, I said any question, and I said follow up with anything you want to follow up with, because there has to be freedom for people to say whatever they need to say in order to be able to go inside of themselves and and express themselves as opposed to repress themselves. It is very rare that somebody who is depressed, alienated, committing suicide, has family dinner nights in which those types of guidelines are followed, in which both parents are involved, in which there is the opportunity to both express themselves, and also the requirement for discipline to be able to achieve things that are part of what your framework of uniqueness allows you to achieve. As parents, we are not here to tell our children, you exist, therefore you're served. Or you exist, therefore you deserve. We're here to tell our children, your job is you exist, therefore you also serve.
Okay. So on a similar vein here, Mr. Aries has a question. If you have been ignored as a child and grew away from parents, is there any way forward to heal the emotional crisis and damage on an individual level without medical assistance?
I'm not saying medical assistance shouldn't happen, but yes, there is. The first is sort of an attitude shift. One is that, let's say your father beat you with a belt when you were growing up, and you may feel that that was cruel and abusive, and of course it was, and you may have taken away from that really feeling of being not valued and shut up and so on. I ask you, most parents, they may have parented in a way that we have discovered today is bad parenting, but most of them parented the way they felt was good parenting. So, if you're at all into the Bible or history, you understand that, part of the Bible was spare the rod, spoil the child. So from your parents or your grandparents' perspective, that hitting of you was not child abuse. Refraining from hitting you when you didn't do something that was going to help you be a responsible adult, that would have been child abuse. And if you can reframe if you can discover your parents' best intent, your mom's best intent, your dad's best intent. Let's say your dad was an alcoholic or your mom was an alcoholic, and they left the family, deserted the family, undervalued the family, were focused more on their drugs than on you. To understand the pain that they went through, that they bit off more than they could chew when they had children, but their best intent was not to bring you up without love. Their best intent was to bring you up with love, and they were either inadequate to the task, or they were bringing you up in the way that they felt would create the type of discipline that you needed to be able to grow up well. Of course, I hope you know enough about me by now to know that I am not advocating any of those ways of being drunk as parents, or on drugs, or using a belt and using physical force on a child. Comes from parents who do not know how to do things like those family dinner nights, do not know how to set boundaries and enforce boundaries. Many parents, especially moms, are very good at setting boundaries, but they're not good at enforcing boundaries. So, for example, a mom will tend to say something like, mom and dad will tend to set boundaries the same way. They'll both say, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas, let's say. And the children will test boundaries the same way. They'll try to have as few peas as possible before they get permission for their ice cream. The difference is between the way moms and dads enforce boundaries. And when they enforce boundaries, moms will tend to sort of look at, okay, I don't want my child to be, sort of crying and upset, and maybe she or he had a tough day. So, okay, sweetie, if you have this many more peas, then you can have ice cream. Whereas the dads will tend to say, excuse me, we have a deal here. The deal is you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. And so with the mom, the child learns that to finish that the child doesn't have to finish the peas, that the child can negotiate a better deal, that the child can manipulate the mom to have fewer peas in order to get the ice cream. With the dad, the child's more likely to learn that she or he has no option to manipulate the father, that they've got to finish the peas in order to get the ice cream. But the result oftentimes with the mom is that the mom keeps repeating, I need you to finish the peas. I need you to have more peas. And so after a while, the mom being disobeyed to a greater degree may become more and more exacerbated. I mean, upset and lose her temper and say, okay, from now on you have to do this or that, and the punishment becomes very hard. And then the mom feels badly that she overstepped her boundaries and didn't want to hurt the child with this severe punishment, so she doesn't follow through with the punishment. And the result of all of that is the mom feels very frustrated and disconnected, and the child feels like there's this huge punishment, or the child was hit, and feels unhurt, feels hurt and unloved. But so what I'm asking for you to do as a young man is to look back on, yes, your mom may not have set enforced the boundaries not because she didn't like you and she then lost her temper, not because she didn't love you, but she lost her temper because she didn't know how to enforce those boundaries in the same type of way.
Okay.
Now, having said all of that may not apply, and all of that is just an example. And please, do make use of therapists. And if therapists are not affordable to you, make use of faith-based communities and make use of talking to and with people about these issues. And this is, so use multiple levels of outreach to work on yourself, because you deserve to be valued, and every single person does.
Okay. Our next question comes from Kale. She asks, do you think that a mother who is absent in her child's life will have a big impact on the child? And what type of behavior do you think would be expected from this child?
Fortunately, a mother who's absent in the girl's life it's very often very tough. Is there enough space for me to be able to ask whether the father was absent or not absent?
I believe
Yeah.
it's a general question. Kayla,
Okay.
if you want to write in the chat about if it's a specific case, if the father was absent, or she's writing. Okay, it's just a general question.
Okay, sure. A mother being absent is also very tough on a child. Is particularly tough on a girl child because of the sort of the parallel reasons that I was mentioning before. Both children, especially ones that are deprived of the other parent, they tend to be even more dependent on the role model of this other same sex. And fortunately, girls have more permission in society to express feelings, and if they don't have a mother, they will often, their feelings and their fears and their crying and their upset will be more likely to be heard by other people. So for example, even as late as college, girls who go to college are not as expressive as their feelings many times as girls who do not. But even in college, 75% of the use of the therapists in college are by females. And whereas 75% of the suicides among college males and females are by males. And so the price that a girl will pay for not having a mother is greater than the price that a boy will pay for not having a mother. But obviously the price of motherlessness is very significant for both girls and boys. I say obviously, it may not be obvious. A father raising the child predominantly does tend to be more nurturing on average than the average male, and also tends to be more nurturing than the average male who parents with a female, because the father that is parenting a female will tend to, when the female is absent, will tend to realize that nurturing is needed to a greater degree and give the girl more nurturing. But anytime that a mother can be involved is absolutely, optimal for a child. But again, a mother and father need to not just be involved, they need to be involved in a checks and balance type of way. So for example, if a child comes to a mom and says, Mom, can I climb the tree in the backyard? I want to climb the tree. I want to climb the tree. My friend wants to climb it too. And mom will tend to say something like, well, sweetie, maybe in a year or two, but now you're too young to climb that tree. But maybe in a year or two, you can do that. And so maybe the child goes to the dad and says, Dad, mom won't let me climb that tree. Can I climb the tree? I think I'm old enough to do that. Well, okay, sweetie, you can climb the tree, but just be very careful when you're doing that. And so the mom then hears that the child can climb the tree and got permission from dad, and the mom says to the dad, what are you doing? Allowing the kid to climb the tree. Suppose she or he falls and gets a concussion and a spinal cord injury. Are you going to be responsible for that? And the dad says, you can't protect the child forever. Sooner or later, the child has to learn to live a life, and make decisions for her or his own. I think she's old enough to climb that tree. And then the mother and father get into an argument, and that argument maybe leads to a conclusion. And the conclusion might be, for example, that the child can climb the tree, but only up to a certain level. And there's certain branches that are too thin, and the parents need to make the decision to not allow the child to climb on those branches. And the child can climb on the tree, but only if dad is out there under the tree, able to cushion the fall of the child. And by the way, dad, don't get preoccupied with the cell phone. In fact, I don't even trust you. If you have the cell phone there, I'll take the cell phone. Then you can be under the tree. Then you can protect the child. Now, what the child's gotten from that deal is that's what I call checks and balance parenting. Many people end up with feeling that they are going to get divorced because they feel that the mother feels the father is underprotective, and that comes from a lack of love, and the dad feels the mother's overprotective, and that comes from a desire to infantilize the child. But in fact, the children that do the best are the ones that had that checks and balance parenting. And parents have to understand that dialogue, similar to what I just described, it does not mean that you are bad parents that need a divorce. That dialogue is exactly what good parents do, but not with anger, but with the understanding that the mother and father, both have something to contribute to the parenting process, or what I call checks and balance parenting, done from an equal amount of power on the part of the father and the mother. When the father's style of parenting is not, mother's parenting almost always remains intact. Mothers will parent the great majority of time. Dads, though, if they're valued more for earning money than for parenting, will often leave the parenting process and do what they feel appreciated for. And so dad's parenting is much more in jeopardy as a rule than mom's parenting.
Okay. This next question is a little curious. Scavenger Burke wants to know, how much of a difference would you make between military and veteran parents versus non-military parents when it comes to raising a child?
Yeah, very good. Well, and very important question. So what happens often with military parents is that it's more frequently the male that is away on a tour, and oftentimes 2 or 3 or 4 tours in a row. And so when he comes back into the home, there's nothing that he's living more for than coming back in the home and being able to be an equal parent and having the children love, appreciate him, and so on. But the mother has gotten very used to running the home by herself, and she feels very much like any outside input on the part of the father is more likely to be seen as dysfunctional, or as insensitive, insensitive both to the way she's formed her life and what seems to work for them. And the father, having been through boot camp, having been through discipline, will often see children that are overprotective and that are underperforming. And maybe a child comes back from school in 3rd grade and says, you know, I am, let's say, first grade, because maybe the child, the veteran father's been away for only you know, 6 or 7 tours, and the child is saying, you know, I hate my first grade teacher. She doesn't like me. I'd like her if she liked me, maybe, but she hates me. And the mom will say, well, you know, sweetie, I can go in and make an appointment with the teacher. I'm part of the PTA. I have a good, I have not the teacher, but the principal. I'll talk to the principal and we'll get you switched over to a different class. Dad comes home as a veteran and says, that's, you know, Lauren or whatever her name is, the daughter, she needs to learn to get along with people that, you know, that don't like her or that she doesn't like. People, life isn't just about having around you the people that you like. Oh, you're too mean for her. You don't want her to have a bad experience in school in the first grade, do you? You're being very insensitive to her future. You could traumatize her for life. Again, both of these may be true, but because the father's been out of the picture, typically for a long period of time, the mother feels that she has it under control. She feels resentful. She feels interfered with. And so, and the father learns after a while that what he came home for, which was to be loved by the family and to be able to offer the benefit of his discipline and the benefit of being able to and he sees in himself the gap between the male he was when he entered the service and the male he is after that discipline, and how much more he can achieve and how hard it was to do that. And he wants so much to be able to bring that part of his life to his children, to have them get the benefit of that. But when he sees it's not appreciated, not valued, and he's only alienating the family and risking divorce, and therefore everything he fought for, which was for the love of his family, is being threatened to be discarded. That's oftentimes what happens in military families.
Okay, and Virtuous asks, what is your opinion of boys being raised in all male boarding schools and this instilling more discipline in them and having them mature better growing up with their own male peers absent from any female interference?
You know, boarding school for males can be very helpful. However, it's not a substitute for the biological father involvement. Many children, boys, especially in boarding school, do have a significant increase in their discipline, and they do have the value of developing male peers. Although male peers oftentimes by themselves become too heavy duty invested in the shadow side of masculinity, the proving oneself, and not being able to open up, express feelings, and become full human beings, as I mentioned, because male boarding schools are oftentimes built on, on teaching men to prepare themselves for war and for the other hazardous jobs, or the things that men needed to do rather than the things that men wanted to do. And so those are the downsides and the upsides of male boarding school. But the biggest upside of male boarding school is that many boys really need their biological father to love them and to be with them. And hangout time with the biological father is so important. Being able to see in your biological father who you will be as an adult male, much more than you do the males at boarding school or the male teachers. If your dad has been killed, or your dad is completely ineffective, or disconnected from the family, or is alcoholic to the point of being abusive, boarding school can be helpful. But every dad should know that boarding school is no substitute for the need of your son to be able to give involved guidance from you, to please spend time with the Boy Crisis book and the portions of it that talk about the 9 differences between what dads do versus what moms do, and why each of the things that are dads' propensities for parenting are so crucial for the development of both girl and boy children, but especially boy children. Those are things that do not happen at boarding school nearly to the degree that they happen at home.
And the user Don asked, I think I can make it out. What is the poster in the background you have there?
Oh, the poster in the background is a copy of the Boy Crisis book, and that's the, and then different certificates that I have. But I think you met the Boy Crisis poster in the background.
So what got you? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot that went into it, but what was, I guess, the grain of rice that tipped the scale to get you to write this book?
Yeah, let's see, a few things. My first books were, my first book, The Liberated Man, was completely from the feminist perspective. And then about 10 years later or so, I began to start to try to ask, I formed a number of men's groups, about 300 men's groups and a number of women's groups, about 200 women's groups around the country. And I began to sort of listen. Eventually, I started listening to what men were saying, as opposed to just telling the men that they were being chauvinist for feeling the feelings they were feeling, and only explaining things from the feminist perspective. And so the first book I wrote that incorporated the male perspective was a book called Why Men Are the Way They Are. And then that led ultimately to my looking at the issues of fathering, and seeing that fathers, the children that grew up with fathers, were far more effective, both girls and boys, than ones that didn't, and that led to father and child reunion. And then that book, I began to see, led to that by this is now 2001, 2002, at that area. I began to see that there were a lot of things that we in the feminist movement had said that just plain were not accurate, and that were leading a lot of guys to feel like they were part of the bad sex, the toxic masculinity sex. And so, for example, one of those things was of males more likely to be engaged in domestic violence against women than women were against males. And I saw, that there were now 100 studies by 2001 that showed that males and females were equally engaged in domestic violence at every level of violence, except killing. And killing was much more complex because, for reasons that I talk about in the Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say book. So I wrote, about what women can't hear that men don't say. And I called the book Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say because I didn't want to blame women for not hearing these things, because men weren't speaking up about them, and men weren't speaking up about them because the society wasn't offering the male perspective. So that book was not only filled with things that were that were left out of the social discourse, the male part of the dialogue, but also the first third of the book was engaged in teaching people how to listen to each other without, whether they were male or female, and people that were angry, being able to hear out those people who are angry. And so that led me to starting to then I wrote the book on why men earn more and what women can do about it. But during this process, I was beginning to, as I was speaking around the world, I was hearing a lot of female teachers say to me, Warren, the boys in my class are doing significantly worse than the girls in my class. And so that was, I was beginning to get that message 20 to 30 years ago. And I started looking around the world and seeing that that was true in classrooms all around the world. And that led to my discovering that the children that were doing worse were by far and away that that there was a boy crisis, and that the boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. And so but I also saw that there were other reasons for the boy crisis. So I outlined the 10 reasons for the boy crisis to my publisher, and committed to exploring all 10 of those reasons. But the more deeply I understood the boy crisis, the more I realized that the number one reason by a long shot was dad deprivation. And so I began to focus more on that for the boy crisis. And then I'm a person who is committed to solutions. So I started looking for solutions on the family level. So the book, every single problem that's mentioned in the boy crisis book is followed by a solution to solve that problem on the family level, and then the school level, and then the state, local, and national level. And so that's what led to the boy crisis.
Okay. Just so everyone does know, his recent book The Boy Crisis is available on his website, warrenfarrell.com. I have linked in announcements the book page. The ebook is $7.99, and it's also on Audible, which I really appreciate. I love Audible. I just bought the book myself. I'll be listening to that this week. So we are right about on time. Do you think you can take a couple more questions before we wrap up here?
Yes, just one thing on the Audible thing. I have found, like you were saying, that especially the male audience for the book is much more, the Audible version seems to be really very much appreciated, that hearing it in my voice. And I spent 5 days recording it in the studio. And John Gray, my co-author, recorded his own voice as well. And I'm getting probably more people saying, I finished the book. It's a long book on Audible. Almost everybody says they finished it on Audible, whereas many people, they just don't feel that they have enough time, maybe except in this in the virus period of time, to do the reading of the book. So I do think your decision was a good decision.
All right, so let's see.
And yes, I can take it. Another question. It's fine.
Okay. So let's see. Oh, there was a good one I wanted to grab here. Just see where this was. Yes, James Adams wanted to know, with, of course, a lot of people are, staying indoors with coronavirus going around. James Adams says that he has heard that most of the people dying from it have been males, and he's wondering why that's happening.
Yes, the answer, first of all, that is accurate. It's about in China and South Korea, it's about a 70% male death rate, not contracting rate. It's a much lower gap among men and women who contract the virus. But in a couple of cultures, it is only 60% to 40%. So the range is 60% male deaths to 70% male deaths, basically. Why? My guess is that the immune systems of males is not as strong as the immune system of females. It's one of the reasons why men die sooner. We also are more likely to be in hazardous occupations when Walmart and Amazon and the local grocery stores, et cetera, are much more likely to be able to have people be delivery people, and work in places that where they're exposed to other people. We're more likely to do that. We're more likely to be the risk takers, and so any type of risk, we're more likely to do. We're less likely to be self-protective. And so I think all of those things are part of what leads to the stronger sex being, in fact, the weaker sex.
Okay, and so just a final question to wrap this up here. As I mentioned before, our audience on here is mostly really young. I think the vast majority are under 30. I'm often called a boomer because I'm 30. And
You are old, my goodness. I'm sure
so
your audience can see that I am also a millennial, or was 40 years ago.
So, and I would guess that the average age is probably about 22 from those I've talked to. And I'm just, very broadly, we've talked a bit here, but just on, for particularly young people trying to lead, happy and fulfilling lives, what kind of general advice would you impart with them?
Yes, first of all, really understand why masculinity is not about male privilege, is not about male entitlement. Take a careful look at the myth of male power. Look at what it would look like if the roles were reversed and we were had females sign up for female-only draft registration. If we had females committing suicide at 1,750% greater level than males when they're 85 or older. Just go through the data, understand that your life, your history as a male has been about being trained to sacrifice. Don't, but learn as you're able to share what the contributions of men and masculinity have been to the culture. Learn to share those in loving ways. Learn to hear out the women in your life who disagree with you first. When you hear them out, don't just hear them out while practicing in the back of your mind what you're going to say to disagree with them. Let them know what you heard. Let them know what you've seen that you empathize with, because it's not until a woman is heard that she stands even a chance of hearing you. And so, and also but at the same time, get together with other men who are open to hearing that. So, go on the Facebook version of the Boy Crisis. A part of the Boy Crisis website, that's a book, a website that's devoted to that issue. Go on to boycrisis.org and get involved with the Facebook community, where you can talk to other men who have read that book or who understand these issues. When you listen to the Boy Crisis TEDx talk that I do, sign on to that and search for other talks like mine on fatherlessness, on boys' issues. There's a new one by Marilyn York. And when you do that, your algorithm will show up that you are interested in boys' and men's issues, and you'll begin to form a community of people that can hear you. But you will find in that community of people that can hear you a lot of angry men also. And the normal response to angry men is to disagree with them or disengage from them. I encourage you, just like I encourage you to do with an angry woman, is to hear the angry person out and to always remember that anger is vulnerability's mask. And your job when someone is angry is to hear out their vulnerability and to have them hear that you get their vulnerability. And you will find that every angry person that you hear out in that type of way, I shouldn't say every, but the great majority of those people will soften and become more the type of person that you like when you have heard them first and when you see their anger as vulnerability's mask.
All right. I remember before when we talked, you mentioned that phrase, and I think that's very, I'm not really sure what phrase you use. I guess I would just say powerful, that anger is vulnerability's mask. So
Thank
I want to say, of course, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it.
you. Are very welcome. And my website, my email is warren@warrenfarrel.com. I take extra time to answer every single email, so you can feel free to make use of that.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Warren.
You're very welcome. It's really a pleasure talking with you.
Likewise.